In this video, I would like to introduce you to how the data and object system in Blender works. This is similar to how Maya, for example, treats an object and the containing mesh or NURBS data. And this is also very similar to the way how Alias works, which is one of the main reasons why I like pairing Blender Alias together with Fusion. So let's go to add, and then we add a cube. Okay, so now we added an object. For example, here in the properties menu, we have the icon for all the object information. So cube can, for example, rename it. Here we have under transform information about the position, rotation, and scale. On the right side, when we press N, you see it opens the property panel, or click on the plus icon. You see it the same as well, including a dimension readout. Okay. Under relations, there we have, for example, layers. Same here. If the object is linked to a parent, we have some display settings and render settings. Okay, so this is the object. Now when we go to here, there we have the data panel. And you see big cube. This object includes cube.003. Let's say mesh stuff. So that is the mesh, the geometry. One easy way to think about it or explain it is actually, let's take a look at Illustrator. In Illustrator, before you can write text, you have to draw a text box. And then you go into edit mode, into the text box, and then you write your characters. And in Blender, or Alias or Maya, pretty much the same. We first have to create an object and then we plug some geometry into it. And in Blender, instead of characters, we just have polygons and edges and faces and vertices. Okay. Good. Let's rotate the view a little bit because I would like to show you something first. Actually, let's go to a side view. So we're in front. You see there is the object center point. And this center point is positioned at XYZ all 0. So if I say we'll move this cube, please, 2 meters up, it moves not necessarily the mesh up to the height of 2 meters, but it moves this object point or the object origin to the Z 2 meters position. Could also say 1 here, moves it over. Could even say along the y-axis, please rotate this. The nice thing is this is all object based, so I can always undo everything and reset it. So everything what I do here right now, I can even click on those arrows and, for example, move it up and down. I could also say here, just rotate. Could also scale this. This is all done just to the object. And the mesh will simply follow it. And again, if I don't like this, I can left mouse button, click and swipe over all lines, and for example, reset it. I can set all this to 1. Hey, let's say I would like to make a scale model, half of it. There, I can model 1 to 1, and then simply select the object and say, make myself a scale. Perfect. Okay. So this is all done just to the object. But how do we now manipulate, for example, the mesh? Well, we have to go into what's in Blender called edit mode. In Alias, for example, you display the CVs, or in Maya, you go to the edit mode for the certain geometry parts. So in Blender, we have the object mode and the edit mode. The hotkey for this is tab. So with tab, you enter and you leave, you enter and you leave. 1 key, 2 functions. Perfect. Okay, let's go back to move mode. And up here, you see we have the selection for vertex, for edge, for face. Here's another one that's interesting. We can actually make what's behind the object visible or hide it. So you can select through, or you cannot select through an object. And here, for example, we have some snapping tools. Snap to increment with the grid function, or snap to vertex or face or edge, etc. Okay. So now here, for example, I can go ahead and move all these parts. So see, this is maybe when we come from CAD, we could maybe call this direct modeling. I directly manipulate the geometry. And then when I leave edit mode, you see, for example, the dimension adjusted. So this is kind of like the difference between object mode and edit mode, and also the object data, which is just a container, and the mesh data, which is then the actual geometry. One nice thing, for example, is the following. Let's say we make another plane. There's a plane, and let's make a cylinder there. So when I go to this object or this object, just so you understand how powerful this layer could be, and I click on this list, you see that it lists 3 objects or 3 mesh blocks here that all have a 0, which means nobody uses them right now. And cylinder, mesh stuff, and plane. I could say now to this object plane, instead of using plane mesh, use the mesh from the cylinder. So now actually I cloned, or I linked interactively those 2 objects, using them the same geometry. If I go into edit mode and, for example, move this one up, you see the other one moved. So, for example, if we think about Fusion 360, this is similar to the components. Components are clones. And specifically here, this can be very useful for doing design variations. Instead of making new objects, I just make certain stages of my mesh, and then I can switch between them. This right now might be a little bit confusing since we are just starting the semester, but I just wanted to show you what the object and the data block means, and then what further we can do with all this. Okay, there's one last element I would like to show. So let's delete everything. Let's go make a new plane. And you see, because this is a plane, the object center is also positioned on the plane. This is good. But let's say we have a cube, and now I would like to work with this cube a little bit. So for example, this object center point, I would like to be on this lower face. So how do I do this? So there are 2 ways. I could either go into edit mode and move the cube geometry up, or for example, I can select the lower faces or points and then snap the object center to it. So let's go with version 1. I go into edit mode. I can switch to the wireframe, so I can easily select all these points. And then with 1, I go to a side view. I have increment and snap to grid turned on. I can turn this on. And then when I move this up, you see everything snaps nicely to the grid. Now the object was created at the world's center 000. So now I lined up my mesh to the object center point. Perfect. Because now when I, in this view, press R to rotate, you see everything rotates around the object center point or pivot point. So the object center point can also be used, for example, as a hinge or a rotation axis. It's very, very useful when we do quick design mockups and we want to interactively move them around. So this was version 1. Let's say I would like to move this point to an edge. So I can go to edit mode, and then I can, for example, select these 2 points, which is equal the edge, or I can go to edge select and then select this edge. Good. So now we have to snap the 3D cursor to the edge. Shift S, cursor to selected. And then, because for the object we have to reset the pivot point or center point, we have to go into object mode. And then if we open the tool palette, here you also will see, based on what mode we're in, a lot of the commands as well. So it's up to you if you want to use them. But for example, here we have a button, set origin to the 3D cursor. So you see now the origin was moved to the 3D cursor. I could also say origin to the geometry, so it moves the center point to the center of my mass. We could also press spacebar, and let's say you remember the name of the command but you don't remember where it is or what the shortcut is. We could, for example, say set origin, and then it filters it out already. And then we can press enter, and then it asks us, well, where do you want to go to? And you see also very often the commands have the shortcut added to it. So Shift Control Alt C, there it is. Perfect. And now if I go to side view 1 on the numpad and press R to rotate, you see everything rotates around that center point. And even when I press S now, you see it all scales to there. Let me put the 3D cursor to somewhere else so you see how this works. Perfect. So before we bring this to an end, there is one last element I would like to make you aware of, and that is the transformation orientation. So we have global, local, normal, and many others. So I will introduce you to global, local, normal, and then custom. And this is a really fantastic and very useful way for precisely building concept models. Currently the object is flat, so it's very easy to move, for example, those edges up. So I select these 2 edges, and then with the arrow key I can move them up. Very easy. Okay. So let's say at one point you want to work on something that is rotated. Our next project will be a small furniture part where the lumber pieces are at different angles. So let's, for example, create a plane. Okay, so there I just have a plane. You see the plane was created where the 3D cursor is. So we'll set everything to 0. And then I can, for example, set the dimension. So let's say this y should be, let's say 6 inches. So it doesn't matter that I'm actually in metric right now. I can also type in the other units and it fixes it for me. 6 inches by 2 inches. Okay, perfect. Good. And then when I go into edit mode, with everything selected, A selects everything or nothing, or I can select the face, or I can shift left mouse button click, make sure I selected all these points. I can go and say extrude or press E. and then simply move the mouse up a little bit till there. Perfect. Leave edit mode by pressing tab, and now there you see I created an object, and let's say maybe this should be 40 centimeters. There. Perfect. Okay. Move Shift D, I will make a copy. I press X to move it to the side. And I will go into edit mode and then rotate it. And let's say maybe I would like this to be later somewhere there. Okay, that's good. Then let's say this is not long enough. But you see now the dimensions are off, and that's because the measuring starts from here to here, so it actually creates a big bounding box around it. This is actually the dimension you see here. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is I can select all those points there and then say local. That doesn't really do anything, but hey, check out when I go normal, it actually selects the face with a point. This works as well, or 2 points, it's an edge, but specifically with 4 points, it's a face. Then now I can extrude, or not extrude, slide actually those 4 points or the face along this new ray. And a better way to do this is you never really want to rotate when we do industrial design your geometry in edit mode. The rotation we actually do more in object mode, and then we can switch to local mode and do further adjustments. So what does that mean? So for example here in object mode, now I can rotate this one, and the main reason is I can always go back and rewrite this to 0 and I have my original element back. So I don't model my piece rotated, I just model it straight and rotate the object. And then when I go into edit mode by pressing tab, I can turn on local, and that is basically the same as normal in this case, but there's one difference. So let's move this one to there. Let's go to normal, and you see this face, well, faces actually this direction, so I can't move it this direction anymore. But what local means, it is actually, you see the z-axis is 31 degrees. If I rotate my object 25, then the local z-axis is rotated 25. So now I can select all this and via local move everything. So go down like this. You see there, this works as well. So pretty awesome. If I go to normal, you can see I can do this, and I come back to local and to this. So that's kind of like the difference between local and global and what normal maybe means. I will show you one last. So for example, maybe I rotate this a little bit to there, and then I select, for example, all these faces. I could also select, if I want, just 2 edges, doesn't matter, but I need to have a nice and clean orientation. And then I can go to transform orientation, and you see what is selected here, and click plus. And then you see here, there it has edge. Now let's go to normal and click plus. And you see now it's selected a face. And you see whatever you had first previously selected doesn't actually even matter, because these transform orientations are created based on what you have selected. So in Alias or so, or in Rhino, I have to define construction planes. So I can move something along a custom orientation, and in Blender simply we select geometry, and from that sample the vector, and then we can save it. So let's go to edge. This one we don't need. Let's go to face, and we can, for example, rename it to something we might find useful. And then you see also up here it pops up. So where this is very useful is, now you see I can always move everything at this slight angle. So whenever I need an object that is somewhat a little bit rotated, that's then how I can create a vector and then later move my geometry. But even in object mode, you see, even there, this works. So the transform orientation tool in Blender is actually really superior. It works a tick different than traditional CAD applications, but if you try, and this is what I will teach you this semester, if you try to use Blender not as approaching from an animation standpoint in the way how they work, but approach it more from a CAD philosophy, then you will quickly see how much you have the same tools in Blender, but for ideation modeling, a much freer and faster workflow.